Hello and welcome to this video and to January's book review. A few apologies to begin with. One, sorry about the lighting, I don't know if it's okay. The stat is that Sheffield hasn't had a full hour of sunshine this year. I don't know how true that is, but that's what Pete heard on the radio the other day. Two, I have no idea how long this battery is going to last or my memory card, so I don't know how much I'm going to be able to be talking. Three, most of them are going to be a picture somewhere because either I read them digitally, wow, I read them digitally, library, audio, all of that kind of stuff, so I actually only have one book to hold up for you. And four, I think we're on four, it's like the 9th, 10th of February and I can't really remember the books that I read at the beginning of the month. But anyway, that aside, let's talk about the books that I read in January. So I started the year maybe like 150 pages, 100 pages into Heavenly Bodies by Imani Erriu. This is my book club pick that we are going to be discussing tonight as I talking to you. So I've read this far too early because I don't know how I'm going to actually talk about this book because I don't really remember it. This is probably the worst book that I read this month and I rated it 3.5 stars, so it's not that it's bad, it's just that every other book I read this month was a 4-star book. So this is a romantasy, I guess, and the sort of magic system is based on celestials, so star signs and different stars and all of that kind of thing. Not gonna lie, I did get a bit confused. We're following, did I write their names down? Elara and Enzo, who are from like rival areas. Elara's kingdom has been decimated and she's like on the, well, she's captured by Enzo's dad, essentially. So there's a prophecy around her and that's why he's got her to try and fulfill said prophecy. But as I said, it took me a little bit of time to get into it, that's first off, and that might be again because of the time period that I was reading it. So I was reading it over New Year, we were down at Pete's parents, and just the momentum and stuff didn't quite grab me. So it did take a little while for me to get into it. It is also a very long book. It's like 500, 600 pages, and I don't think it needs to be that long personally. It could have done with cutting down. Quite easily it could have done with cutting down. But saying that, when I was reading it, it did read reasonably quickly, although my reading pace this year has like plummeted, so I don't know what's happened there. So, but I thought it read reasonably quickly for the size of the book that it is. I liked the sort of star sign elements to it. I thought that was an interesting magic system to implement, but as I said, it did confuse me slightly because each star sign or body or whatever had its like determining power or characteristics, and I just got a bit lost through all of that. It doesn't take much to confuse me in these books. Certainly these romantasy fantasy ones, it's very easy to confuse me. However, the romance between Elara and Enzo I didn't completely believe in, so I guess that took away from it a bit because I didn't fully root for them as a couple, but where it went was interesting. However, the sort of side characters, I suppose they're the servants or like friends or whatever, I liked those ones probably better than Elara and Enzo. I thought they were slightly more interesting. So yeah, it was alright. The book was fine. 3.5 stars is not a bad rating. It's very middle of the road. Well, better than okay, but not as good as I really like that. So 3.5. I probably won't be rushing to the sequel for it. One of those that one day the inclination might take me and I might read it, but it would be definitely a library pick rather than even a charity shop or anything like that. I'm not that fussed whether I read it or not, to be honest. So yeah, that was the first book that I read in January. Now my intention for the rest of the month was to do a random number generator and just go through my whole TBR, both Kindle and physical, and just read like that. But then the film for The Housemaid by Freida McFadden came out, and I knew I had that on my shelf and I wanted to read that before I got any spoilers for it. I mean, consequently I haven't had any spoilers, but I didn't want to take the risk. So I then read The Housemaid by Freida McFadden, which, as I said, I did have a physical copy, but I've lent that to my mum for her to read, which is why I don't have anything to hold up. As I said, all the next books are 4 stars, so I gave this one 4 stars. This is a thriller and my first Freida McFadden book, and I enjoyed it. It was easy to read. I wouldn't say it's the most groundbreaking thriller I've ever read, and what I've heard from Freida McFadden books is that, you know, she's got all these big jaw-dropping twists and stuff, and I didn't find that particularly. Not to say it wasn't twisty, because it was twisty, and I wouldn't say I actually thought about most of the twists or guessed most of the twists, some of them a little, but it wasn't something that I was like, oh my god, that just happened, which has happened with some thrillers. The one that comes to mind is Gone Girl for that. And maybe it's because I've went into it expecting to have some of these like complete manic twists and stuff. Maybe that's why they weren't quite so shocking to me. Probably one of the reasons why it's a 4-star for me is basically all the characters are in it are horrible. There was no one that I particularly wanted to root for, so that was a reason why it couldn't like rate higher for me, because I didn't like any of them. And I also don't understand how this is like a book series. There's like 2 more in it, so I don't really understand how that. Again, like Heavenly Bodies, although I'm less strong with this one. I possibly will read the other ones. I'm not going to go out my way and buy them or anything like that, but I would read more Freida McFadden as well. As I said, she was an easy author to read from. I just wasn't completely blown away by this book, and I know some people absolutely love it. There are others that I've seen from Freida McFadden that intrigue me more than The Housemaid did or does, but I'm glad I gave it a go, and I'm glad I read it now rather than being spoiled by the film. As I said, I haven't actually had any spoilers, but I wasn't sure, so I didn't want to take the risk. The third book that I finished was an audiobook that I got through my library app. We use Libby, and I listened to Bookshops and Bonedust by Travis Baldree, again 4 stars. This is the sequel to Legends and Lattes, which was the first book I read last year, and that was for book club, and I've been meaning to get round to it, and it was available now as an audiobook on my app, which it hasn't been ever, so I thought, sign, I'll listen to that. It was also narrated by Travis Baldree, so it's nice when the author narrates their own story. I did enjoy it. It still had the cozy mystery, not cozy fantasy elements to it. So Legends and Lattes, we're following Viv, who is a barbarian orc who is retired and makes a coffee shop. In this one it's a prequel, so she is a barbarian orc, but she's got an injury, so she's had to stop in this town to like recoup and re-heal, and in that she makes friends with a bookshop owner and works with her to build up this bookshop, along with some other bits and bobs. They always say it's high fantasy, low stakes, and that's basically what it is. So it did still have those cozy elements, the found family bit. There was a little bit of description of food, but not quite so much. But I didn't enjoy it quite so much, and I'm not 100% why. I think it's because it's a prequel, so I know what happens next, and I'd already formed an attachment to some of those characters in the previous book, who obviously weren't in this one. I know there is a third one out, and that is set after Legends and Lattes, so maybe I would prefer that. But I didn't find it really added anything to Viv's character, because we'd already seen her sort of growth from this point to Legends and Lattes, so I didn't feel we needed that for her story. In one of the criticisms of Legends and Lattes is that basically nothing happens. The action part in this is probably a little bit more, but it's still very minimal. I quite like that. I'm not a big one to be reading about hundreds and thousands of fight scenes. I would rather this kind of fantasy. But I did again find it took a little bit of time to get going into the actual story. One thing I will say though is the epilogue I really like, because that is linked to Legends and Lattes. So not quite as good as Legends and Lattes, but still really enjoyed it and liked being back in that world, and I am on the lookout to read the third one. I don't think it's available yet for my library on audio, so I might have to pick that one up physically at some point, but I'm in no rush to do so at the moment. So are we on number 4? I think we're on the 4th book that I read this month was Bride by Ali Hazelwood. This was on my Kindle, again 4 stars. I've read a few Ali Hazelwoods now. I really like The Love Hypothesis. That was my favourite book of the year that I read that, and I've read Love on the Brain, which was nice. I quite enjoyed it, but it wasn't anywhere near. And this was Ali Hazelwood's first sort of paranormal romance. So we're following Misery, who is a vampire, and she is in an arranged marriage so that they can have like a peace pact with the alpha werewolf called Lo. I really like how Ali Hazelwood writes. I enjoy her novels and how she puts a story together. I think that's always quite entertaining and fun. This one is not as good as Love Hypothesis. That's still my favourite, possibly better than Love on the Brain. I like how she's basically taken vampire and werewolf lore that we know about and sort of twisted it on its head and sort of debunked it or affirmed it in different ways. I thought that was quite clever. However, it was a bit heavy on the miscommunication, which is not my favourite. I just sort of want to scream and shake people and say, just talk to each other, it will solve everything. And I didn't quite understand why we needed it in this one. I think it would have made more sense for them to have actually had a conversation, but there we go. And it was a smidge too long for me, so it did slow slightly in the sort of middle section. And although there's a sort of mystery element where Misery is trying to find her friend, then obviously the romance with Lo, and I feel like they were both slightly drawn out a little bit. I liked both elements, I enjoyed reading both elements. I just think maybe take out 50 or so pages, 100 pages, and then that would have been like a really good book, because it would have been a bit more succinct. So again, this wasn't a random number generated book that I was intending on reading. I saw that Mate was on the 99 Kindle deal, so I thought if I read Bride then I'll know if I want to read Mate. I decided against buying it in the end. I'll wait for a little bit longer because it's not one that I'm like hankering and desperate to read, and I'm trying to be a bit more mindful with my 99p Kindle books because I'm just not reading them very well at all at the moment, so I'm trying to be a bit more mindful. But that's the reason why I picked up this book, and I enjoyed it. It's just not one that I'm gonna be shouting from the rooftops about. So the last book I read was 1,000 Broken Pieces by Tillie Cole. As you can see, it's the only one that I can hold up. So this is the sequel to 1,000 Boy Kisses, which I read on holiday last year in June, I think, so I'll link that up for you. And in this we're about 4 years after that book, and we're following Poppy's sister Savannah and how she's coping with grief and that kind of thing. So she is sent on a like retreat kind of thing. It's sent to various different places around the world with a group of other teens, the sort of 17, 18-year-olds who are also going through their own form of grief, and it's supposed to help them learn ways to cope, basically. So again, I gave this one 4 stars, although if I actually did 0.5, this would probably be a 3.75. 1,000 Boy Kisses was like up there as one of my favourite books of last year. It just surprised me a lot and it made me cry, and I don't think I've ever cried at a book before, but I blubbed at that one quite a few times. This one didn't have the same impact as that book for me. I liked being back in the world. I liked having like some of the characters that we'd known from the first book in it, but for most part we're not with them. We're travelling around with Savannah and Cale, I'm gonna say. I don't really know how it's C-A-E-L. I'm gonna call him Cale. A bit like the, you know, leafy green, but I don't know whether that's how you say it. that's the love interest in this one. So yeah, I liked the travel elements because I like that in books anyway. I like the fact that we're looking at coping mechanisms in grief, and I do think it tackled the topic of grief very well. That's not an easy one to deal with in a book, certainly not one that is, I'm assuming, upper end of YA, new adult. So I do think it did that well. My main thing though is I just didn't believe in the romance, and that is the main point of this book. So for me, Savannah and Cale basically used each other as a crutch. They just happened to be. I think they would have just found anybody in that situation. I don't think they're necessarily soulmates and whatever that you're supposed to believe. And I also don't think it's overly healthy, some of the ways that they did it. I know that the leaders in it also make the same point in the book, which I appreciate, but I'm not sure it's the most healthy start to a relationship that they've had, which I suppose is never going to be the case if you form a relationship on one of these retreats. But I do feel like largely they were reliant on each other rather than trying to go on their own journey of healing, which is what they needed to do. So they're in this group with about 6 other people as well. I really wanted to know about some of the other stories. For instance, one of them is like the only survivor of a school shooting. That would have been such an interesting and fascinating thing to delve deeper into, and that's all we know. Which I get, again, I know it's not his story, but some of the other stories would have been much more interesting, I think, than these ones, unfortunately. And also, it really took me a long time to read. It's not like a massive book. We're talking, what are we talking? 330 pages, and it took me forever to read it. So that's another reason why it doesn't do very well, because I obviously read Thousand Boy Kisses in about 4 days. I know I was on holiday, but it's a bit different. And this is where I really noticed that my reading pace has slowed, and I don't know whether it's this book, I don't know whether it's because I was doing other things. Me and Pete got in a little bit of a routine of watching a film, so I didn't have as much time. But yeah, I think maybe we got into that routine because I also wasn't completely hooked into this book, but I did enjoy it. I have given it 4 stars because I don't do the 0.5s, and that is everything that I read in January. And again, I have an idea of what I want to do in February, which hasn't gone that way because we're 9 days in and I haven't actually started that way of reading yet, but there we go. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe. I am a bit more sporadic with the videos that I'm uploading, but I am still uploading every now and again, and there will be books every month. So if you like that kind of thing, then click that subscribe button, and I will see you in the next one.